All right, we are live. And I guess the first question is, did anyone see anything fun on TV last night?
No.
So it's David Dayan here on the weekly roundup. We're going to have a bunch of people from the staff coming in to talk about last night and what the future holds. With me at the moment are Harold Meyerson, senior editor at large, I believe is the official title, and Janie Akere, who we have not had on the roundup, is one of our newest writing fellows. Janie, hi, welcome to the weekly roundup. Hello.
Hi, good to
Um,
be here.
yeah, cool. So I wish it was under better circumstances. We experienced, Harold had a comment in his recap that I have also experienced, which is the niceness of hearing from old friends that you haven't heard from a while, who are texting you because you're a journalist and they think you know something about what's about to happen. So yeah, on that level, on the sort of interpersonal level, it was a great night. It was wonderful to hear from people. Look, I mean, I don't know quite where to begin here. Maybe I'll just ask you your thoughts. Harold, you can kick this off. Just sort of. I mean, we know what you wrote, but I'd be interested to hear what you're thinking right now.
Well, I mean, I wrote that the Democrats have to dump Biden, difficult procedurally and otherwise, that is going to be. And of course, if he doesn't want to be dumped, it becomes probably impossible. But if you look at the not just what I wrote and what Bob Kuttner wrote and what you wrote on our website, but the stuff that's filling up the opinion pages of virtually every centrist to far left publication this morning, a kind of not universal, but very widespread sentiment that there's no way Biden can win and he has to bow out. And that, as I said, and as others, everyone I just named said, he has, all things considered, a fairly stellar presidency. And does he want to go down in history for that, or does he want to go down in history as the guy who enabled Donald Trump to regain power, and God knows what would follow from that? So
Yeah.
that's the issue. Two things occurred to me. One is that when I have encountered some people still making the case for keeping Biden, and there certainly are such people, they kind of invoke, without meaning to invoke, the plot of King Lear, that once the old guy abdicates, chaos will follow at the Democratic convention and so on. Which led me to think that Shakespeare could have written King Lear in two ways. Given Lear's mental deterioration, he could have just as easily written the tragedy of King Lear if he stayed in power. And I think that's certainly something to think about. The other thing that's occurred to me is that the media and public opinion has been full of complaints about why cover political conventions when they're simply shows. Well, what would happen if the political convention that the Democrats hold this summer actually is a contest for the delegates' allegiance, and that the various uh, people come forward and make their case? That would get incredible ratings, and I think there's this hand wringing about, this would look terrible. I don't think it'll look terrible. And I certainly don't think in a public that clearly didn't want either Trump or Biden, uh, that a younger, together, relatively mainstream Democrat, one way or the other, would be a welcome solution to the double haters and everyone else. And as things stand now, as Bob Kuttner pointed out in his column today, a Biden wipeout, if he stays in the race and Trump wins handily, will likely cost the Democrats the Senate, the House, and much else. And so those are
No.
my thoughts as of
All right.
12:35 this afternoon in Eastern time.
Well, I want to be a little bit provocative on some of those, but before I do that, Janie is someone who's a younger person watching this debate, as someone who's just a few weeks into their tenure here at the Prospect. I don't want to put this all on you, but I'm just wondering what your reactions were to this after seeing it and seeing sort of the coverage that's been put together.
Yeah, I think I was surprised at just how pessimistic a lot of these news outlets were about Biden's performance. Um, I mean, watching it myself, it seemed, at least, just giving my impression, it seemed like the most egregious error that Biden made was that he stuttered through some of his thoughts, which I guess is, there's maybe fear that that feeds into the whole idea that he's too old to do the job. Like, look at him tripping over his words, forgetting what to say.
Right, right.
Um, and I mean, trying to get into the head of like one of these double haters, I don't know how much of that would make a difference. Now,
Right.
if you're someone who is critical of both Biden and Trump, and I think plenty of people have very valid criticisms about both of them, I don't know that something, the mere having to pause to like remember what you're saying or something like that is going to be like a deciding factor, or is going to really change your mind about either of them. So I
Yeah.
think
I
it's
mean, I
surprising.
mean, yeah, where I agree with you is, to be clear, of those people who are voting members of the electorate who watch that debate, 93 to 95% of them will not have changed their vote as a result of that debate. Because we're a polarized country, and we have our opinions, and that's sort of the end of it. What everyone's thinking about, of course, is that other 5%, which is completely determinative to the entire election. So, this doesn't portend a 60-40 blowout like McGovern-like proportions or anything. But they think that there will be a struggle for those undecided voters to commit to someone who did not look up to the task of government. So we'll see about that. But I want to bring in Luke Goldstein here, writing fellow as well, for the Prospect. And I want to mention, because we had a question from Music Man 1720 in the chat. We will be talking about the SCOTUS decisions later. We're going to bring on Hassan Kanu, our staff writer, who has been all over the Supreme Court's session here at the end of the session and these last rulings. So we are planning on talking about that late, but we're going to start off with obviously the debate and what the implications are. So thank you, Janie, for that. And Luke, I'm going to go to you now for just some initial reactions here to what you saw and what you think is going to be the outcome.
Yeah, it wasn't great. I mean, I think that some of what you're kind of hearing from, the Biden campaign surrogates right now is this distinction between performance and substance. The performance might have been bad, but just focus on the substance. I just think the issue with that is you can't really separate the two in this situation with the debate. I mean, part of Biden's failings as an orator is that he wasn't effectively able to, combat Trump. He wasn't, I think, even in a deeper sense, wasn't really able to convincingly articulate what the policies were that he's enacted. I mean, there was a sort of laundry list that he kind of went through. There was, negotiating drug pricing. We heard that a lot. There was, defending the ACA, all kinds of stuff, but it didn't amount to, some, kind of greater whole. And I think this is the problem, is that it's a little bit more than just one performance. This has kind of been, it's kind of personified one of the issues for, all of the Biden years of not being able to really communicate and articulate what it is that they're doing, and that's why his popularity has been low. But I think this is, yeah, obviously just gonna, kind of hurt him even more.
Thank you. So I want to pick up on that because it was the subject of what I wrote about on the site today. Um, Presidents are not unitary figures unto themselves. In this case, Joe Biden holed himself up at Camp David for a week to prepare for this debate. When that preparation was conducted, it's very clear to me that they fell. His preparers fell into every trap that every incumbent first-term president falls into when they do their first debate. They want to talk about their record. They spent 4 years on it. They want to give the best foot forward of what they did and why they should be given another 4 years to do the job. And they filled his head with a ton of facts and figures. And it pains me to say this, I'm a policy journalist. I think policy is the most important thing in terms of governing and what an election should be about. But it's not. We have this theater criticism that governs elections these days. And they took someone who is known to, at this point, to have difficulties conveying information succinctly. That's been true his entire career, and clearly, which has been true the last several years of his career. And they gave him 50 things to do on every question in a way that was not going to be good, even if he did it perfectly. It's not in the realm of how you deal with a Donald Trump in a debate. So, I don't think you can escape. And even going beyond that, here's someone who has been kept out of interviews, who has been kept out of impromptu settings for pretty much his entire presidency. They decide, here's what we're going to do. We're going to do one big debate in June. It's even earlier than normal. And we're going to, sort of focus all attention on this one day in the election. We're not going to have an audience. We're going to do it in a studio, so you hear nothing but silence. And we're going to send him out over prepared in the worst possible way to actually try to win this thing. I don't think you can escape the fact that they didn't prepare him for this over 4 years, and then they didn't prepare him well for this in the last day. And yeah, I mean, someone who's of the age that he is, with the limitations that he has, needed to be served better by his staff than he was from a political and communication standpoint.
So let me maybe just say here that, I mean, Trump said all kinds of crazy stuff, maybe we'll get into, but the one point that I just honestly thought was really smart is that Biden maybe doesn't fire enough people, and he probably should think about this for the debate prep strategy, because it really just was really poor. But just to go off this a little bit more, I think the reason this is somewhat of an indictment of like the broader Biden team strategy is that they had a very concerted effort going back to 2021 that we're going to basically cede the media information environment to Trump, to MAGA, and all kinds of extremism, whatever. January 6th, let them dig themselves in a hole. And right. In the 2022 midterms, it looked like maybe that wasn't, the worst plan in the world. Some of that was poor candidate quality on the right. I mean, there are a lot of other factors. I don't think they were prepared for how stubborn inflation was going to be, other economic concerns. I think the problem now is that Biden just wasn't really battle tested. They never built a narrative about what the administration amounted to. And that's kind of what we sort of saw all come together on the debate
right.
stage.
And what they specifically said, and then I'll get to Harold and then maybe JD, what they specifically said was, we're not going to be in your feeds. We're not going to be in your life. We're going to do the job of the presidency. It's not going to be chaos for 4 years like it was under Trump. We're going to stay out of the way. The problem was the American electorate learned through those 4 years that that's what presidenting is staying in your feed, being in your face, and showing forward motion through that. the brutal irony here is that Biden has gotten much more done than Trump ever did, but it looks exactly the opposite. And this was true of the debate as well, because of the way in which the electorate has sort of been trained in a sense.
Well, but that's been true. You know, the people have interpreted that that's part of the business of being president, arguably since Franklin Roosevelt, and
Right.
inarguably since the advent of television, which Dwight Eisenhower was the first president to take advantage of. So we can't, you
I
know,
agree with that. I think
yeah.
it's unfortunate personally, but I completely agree that that's part of the job.
Well,
And
but
yeah,
political persuasion of one, you know, I mean, reaching out and making a difference with what you say certainly matters. And, you know,
yeah,
I mean, the failure of Lyndon Johnson on the Vietnam War, you might contrast to the success of Abraham Lincoln at Gettysburg. That was a speech about why so many American casualties are actually justifiable. You know, so that has been part of the president's job for a long time, explaining your policy and why it makes sense. That is, you know, and the fact that, you know,
right.
they
Which is why
bottled up,
it's tragic. Which is
yeah,
why it's tragic to spend 4 years essentially having the top leadership of the Biden administration say that is actually not the job of the president. I mean,
exactly.
ultimately, by implication, that is what they have been essentially saying.
Yes, but on the other hand, I think one of the reasons they adopted that strategy was that they knew the guy's limitations. Uh, you know, I mean that they
But they
were
gaslit
afraid.
people that there weren't any limitations. That
Yeah,
in
they were
private
they were
he's very engaged and he does all these things. But
right.
you know, and there were some people out there that thought, well, maybe they're just like sitting on him too much because they clearly are creating the impression that they're seeking to diffuse by cloistering him in such a way. But
Exactly. Yeah.
you know what happened yesterday makes one think that uh, that that was maybe the proper strategy. Um, so
Yeah.
we have a question from the audience. I want to get to Janie too, but the question from the audience that I think we should take some time on is, you know, evaluating the mechanics of getting you know, what are the mechanics of Biden withdrawing? Uh, you know, does this happen through the House and the Senate? Does it happen through you know, appealing to you know, sending people up to the White House to tell him this is how it's going to be? Certainly, that is not the case right now. If you look at everybody's statements coming out of the party, it is there is very little daylight there in terms of anyone saying he should resign, he should step down, he should not run for reelection, he should focus on the job. There's nothing like that right now. And think about Ruth Bader Ginsburg, think about Dianne Feinstein, think about David Scott, who is practically incapacitated and runs the House Agriculture Committee, or is the Democratic ranking member.
Part of the problem with the
Think
Farm
about
Bill.
think about all of these people who have stayed well past the date at which this, you know, they probably should have gone, and tell me why you think there would be any change here from that.
Let me suggest that the problem is somewhat that party leaders don't really have a sense of party anymore. You know, many years ago, a smart political writer wrote a book called The United States of Ambition, noting that parties were less and less central in the choice of their nominees, that they really kind of abandoned, in many ways, a sense of what's good for the party. If you go back in the party history to the uh, earlier conventions, you know, what the party bosses, there are no party bosses now, but what the party bosses were concerned about was simply who could win. And, you know, it's not clear to me that the leaders of the party quite have that sense. And B, I mean, in a certain sense, the party is a gerontocracy, as you just
Right.
pointed out, David, without using
Right.
that word.
Yep.
And is upholding gerontocratic values more important than beating Donald Trump? I mean, that's sort of the crude way I would put the choice.
Uh, Janie, as someone uh, in your position and age and whatnot, seeing a change in the nominee at this point, do you think that you or your friends or people you associate with would see that as a positive step or something that seems rather chaotic and a response to a kind of a wild response to events?
I honestly think it depends because, it seems like if we were to replace Biden as a nominee now, there's a lot of, you know, you'd have to build the campaign up from like scratch again,
Yep.
like getting the name recognition and like the media presence and, making it clear what this candidate actually stands for. That's a lot of work. And Biden, for all the criticism he gets, he already had a lot of that because of like, his time with Obama. I think a lot of that is the reason why he got elected in the first place. There was kind of this desire to sort of return to a sense of
Mm-hmm.
normalcy. And I
Right.
think that's kind of what carried him through his presidency up to today. But with all the sort of controversies around, say, his policies in Gaza, he's gotten some pushback about some of his immigration proposals as well. And of course, with inflation, I think, especially with this kind of perception among younger people, um, I think theoretically, I think a lot of people my age would have loved to see someone younger and someone who is more in step with maybe the policies that we support. But I think at this point, it would be considered potentially very chaotic and desperate.
Yeah. Uh, I, I am struggling to figure out uh, this notion that the same people who brought us to last night and who, kind of bit their tongue, buttoned their lips, and allowed that to take place are the people who are really equipped to, and also who prepared him in that fashion for the debate, are really equipped to substitute a candidate, massage all the factions of the party that would need to be massaged in order to get to some consensus, and then run a quick sprint 3 month campaign. I just don't see the talent or unification necessary to get that done.
Well, but
And
those are
and
the same people. But you identified in what you wrote that we posted on the website today by name the people around Biden. It's not I don't trust the people around Biden to handle the rest of his campaign based on what they've done so far. I would
right.
welcome some other, the
I just
Democratic
think of
Party.
Deus.
The Democratic Party has a lot of folks, not just those surrounding Joe Biden. And I
Yeah,
don't
the
think,
the other ones weren't good enough to beat him 4 years ago. I mean,
well,
this idea of a Deus ex machina that's available that would be, that would afford a better opportunity to beat Trump at this point is in serious question. And the biggest thing to me, by the way, is the money. Nobody else can access that money except Kamala Harris. The money that has already been raised for this reelection campaign. So the idea that you just have to overlook Kamala Harris and have this sophisticated quick sprint delegate primary, um, uh, the money thing you lose, right? Uh, uh, in a much bigger sense, you pass over the first black woman to ever hold a presence on a major party ticket. I think that's huge problem, a huge problem in a party where black women are honestly the backbone of it. And please, Janie, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd love to speak to that actually. So,
Please.
yeah, thinking back to the 2020 election, like the Democratic primaries, we had, you know, as well as Kamala Harris, we had a bunch of women who were running. But I think after the aftermath of the 2016 election, there were questions of like whether a woman was considered strong enough to beat Trump. And so I think there was a lot of kind of, I mean, a lot of the circumstances are similar between, 2020 and 2024. Kind of the idea of like, we need someone who's strong enough to beat Trump, and we don't want to see another woman be berated the way he did to Hillary. So it seemed the
Right.
safest option was just to go with Biden. But it was incredibly frustrating to see so many women get sidelined during that
Right.
election. And it's frustrating to see, like, it was frustrating to see how few people were even willing to sort of step up and even run a primary campaign. So we kind of ended up stuck with Biden. And we had like Dean Phillips, but like who I couldn't name anybody who actually really knows who he is or what he stood for.
Absolutely. But honestly, you have to give him a little bit of credit, right? He was
Yes.
like the only guy who was willing within this sort of, very top down Democratic Party to say, this guy's probably too old. So as a replacement level Democrat, I should probably run against him. No, he didn't get any traction. And, I'm not sure he was equipped to take on Donald Trump anyway. But you got to give him a little bit of credit for at least being able, having the guts to step out and say it. Luke, what do you think?
If Biden steps down, Kamala Harris is the most likely nominee, and Gretchen Whitmer would be a strong alternative too. So it's not like women would be shut out of the
I,
process
I,
if
I just don't. I don't know that there's any possibility to pick somebody other than Kamala Harris. Honestly, if and I'm not like Kamala Harris. I was once a constituent of Kamala Harris's, and she would on various policy grounds, I would have some reservations, but I don't see that you could choose anyone else. And her approval ratings have actually gone beyond Biden's at this point. That's people have often said, well, Harris is in just as bad a position as Biden. On the approval rating front, that's not actually true anymore. But I think that there would be this inclination to open things up in a way that would reopen all of the wounds of the 2019-2020 period of the Democratic primaries only in like a 4-week period, like this super condensed timeline that it would be unpredictable and have much potential for chaos. Luke, go ahead.
Democrats used to do this all the time before the advent of television.
Yeah, but we have television now.
I know,
like we'd
but
all see this. We'd all see
yeah,
this every second.
see. I
We have
don't think it
social
would.
media now. We didn't
I
have
don't
it in
think it would be. I don't
1924.
think it would be a disaster. But neither you nor I can
103rd
infallibly
ballot,
predict
the
what would happen.
103rd ballot in 1924 didn't happen.
But that was a
With
party with
Twitter.
two. That was a party with two hugely entrenched constituencies that hated each other, and there also took a
You
two-thirds
don't
vote.
think there are two hugely
No, not
entrenched constituencies that
facing the
hate each
president,
other in the Democratic Party?
facing the prospect of a Donald Trump presidency. I think, uh, the party, would have to grow up. Maybe it couldn't, but maybe it could.
Luke, what do you think?
Well, I mean, look, I think we can all agree that we're kind of between a rock and a hard place now.
Right.
And I'm going to defer to Harold on all things, about the history of open conventions and such. So, and I don't understand all the mechanics of this. I do just I think we should be realistic about what that process, though, is actually gonna look like. And Li Fang, who writes on Substack, has a great piece about who the actual super delegates are and the people who sit on the DNC's rules and bylaws committee, I believe it is, that would actually be, at the center of how this would all go down. And they are they are chock full of corporate lobbyists. I'm just going to point this out. Like there's a Boeing lobbyist on there, Dick Gephardt. There's a Lockheed Martin lobbyist. There are tons of other people. And, this is in some ways, I think represents, why we moved away from the party, boss convention era, because, there were concerns about, candidates being just drawn up in smoke-filled back rooms and such. Yeah. So I'm just going to throw that out there.
I read Lee's piece too, and I while I do agree with that, he's making an assumption that the super delegates alone would be able to decide. That is actually functionally impossible with the current rules of the DNC. What would have to happen is Biden would have to release his delegates that he won through the 50 primaries. And really only Biden can make that choice. Right. And my personal view, and we can talk about this maybe, is that no one is going to be able to influence him or leverage him on making that choice except for his wife. I don't see anyone with the standing in the Democratic Party to tell Joe Biden, who kind of resents the Democratic Party, who thought he should have been president probably in 1988, and who thinks he's been passed over for 40 years, who thought that he was forced to not run in 2016 in favor of Hillary Clinton. He will react by getting his backup if he's told that he has to step down for the good of the party by anyone who is a political colleague, maybe not by a family colleague.
What about like Obama and Ted Kaufman? Are we just saying sort of the inner circle now?
I don't think Obama would have any. Obama, who told him he shouldn't have been president 8 years earlier, I don't think he has any juice on this.
I mean, he cleared the field.
I would think Ted Kaufman would be a pretty powerful voice if he reached that conclusion.
Well, I mean, Ted's not in the inner circle right now, and the point of the inner circle is they're loyal. They're loyal to the guy, like the Mike Donelans and Anita Dunns. They've been loyal to Biden for 50 years. You think
they're smart, loyal.
They're self-delusional. They're going to tell themselves that there's a way out of this.
There's smart loyal and there's dumb loyal. And, smart loyal is you had a pretty damn good presidency. Do you really want to be remembered for bringing Trump back to power? I'm not saying that the loyalists necessarily think that, but, that's some part of their brain that has to be something they're considering. And, who knows? Who knows?
Look, three of us on this panel here are going to the convention in Chicago. So, nothing would make me happier than to actually have something to cover.
Yeah.
When I'm there. I mean, I think journalists get like really excited in thinking we hear about brokered conventions like every 4 years. They never happen, or they haven't since for a long time.
1952.
And there you go. Thank you, Harold. And in this case, it really is up to Biden. It really, 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 really is up to Biden. Biden is in North Carolina, where Janie is right now, today. And I don't think his speech will have any indication that he's looking to step out. In fact, he gave a speech right after the debate that was infuriating because he sounded fine. he was like feeding off the crowd. It was ridiculous.
Well, there's one other factor, which is that if Democratic elected officials begin to fear that he's going to drag them down, it would not be in their self-interest to keep him atop the ticket.
I mean, there's a sense that the people who are funding these campaigns can make a stand. There's a sense that people who, share a ticket with him can make a stand, can say these things. I just don't really think that's going to sway Joe Biden, who thinks, who for 50 years has thought he's been looked upon as the dumbest guy in the room when he's actually smarter than everybody. There were plenty of people who thought he shouldn't run in 2020, and he proved them wrong. And I think he will take those kinds of entreaties as more nervousness and more betting against him when they shouldn't. So I mean, that's just my view of the situation. I don't have special knowledge into Biden himself, but that's my understanding of based on just watching him for a long time. All right, where do we go from here? On the Harris question, I'll leave this to anyone. I mean, do you really think there's an avenue for someone other than Kamala Harris to be the nominee if Biden says, I'm not going to run for reelection?
I think there's a remote possibility, yes, but how that happens, what he says, uh, the position of other elected officials. I mean, we don't know. She's got to be the favorite. That much I think we would agree on if he bows out. Whether she is, whether it's a slam dunk or whether the process is such that other folks enter, it depends on so many variables that I don't know that we can judge that. But even if it's put open, she's still a favorite.
Well, look, if you look at the piece of art that is most indicative of how Washington works, and that would be Veep. Their season 4 was the president, the unnamed president, stepping down, making Selena Meyer the first woman president in the country's history. She ran for that election, and the race ended in a tie. So, if life is going to imitate art, there's a viable path to make this season 4 of Veep, which would be the dumbest possible outcome, which usually is the most likely one, it seems, in the past decade of American life.
There's one other artistic metaphor. It was very hot in Washington over the last week, and attention was paid to a wax a sculpture of Abraham Lincoln that was put in front of a local high school, and in the midst of the heat wave, it melted. The melting president was I think a strong metaphor here in Washington over the last week. I regret to report, and if it can happen to Abraham Lincoln, who knows what can happen to just about anyone else, and it may have already happened last night.
One thing, I hate to go back to sort of strategy, but and this debate, but we should pay a little attention to the Trump side of this debate, right? I mean, this guy, and I'm going to start with Janie and Luke on this one, was kind of a whirlwind of nonsense for close to 2 hours. Let's maybe hone in on Trump and what he did and how that affects things. Janie, you want to take that to start?
Yeah. So the thing that I think stuck out the most to me about Trump's part of the debate was just how much repetition that he employed. Like, I think this is part of what bothered me about like the moderators too, because they kind of just let him like go back to like a previous point that like Biden made instead of just answering the actual question, which I don't understand why they did that. But more to the point, um, the fact that Trump kind of repeated a lot of the same stuff, like he had a lot of the same plot points about like immigration and about the economy, about like war in Ukraine. And I do wonder about like it's very easy to debunk the stuff he's saying, but having to do it over and over again, having all this repetition, like there's kind of the conventional wisdom that the more you repeat something, the truer it seems, or the harder it is to sort of dispel. And it takes so much energy to try to dispel something like that. So I wonder if that's part of like the perceived failure of Biden is that he maybe people didn't think he did enough to like debunk what Trump was saying.
Right. And there's the kind of if you're explaining, you're losing kind of aspect to it as well. There was a really telling part in the very beginning of the debate where Biden answered a question and Trump asked if he could respond. And Jake Tapper said, well, I'm going to ask you a follow-up question, and then you can respond however you want. and that was the whole debate. Like, the questions were completely immaterial on the Trump side. He responded however he wanted. Luke, what did you see out of Trump's performance?
Yeah, I have a few thoughts on this. So we've written quite a bit recently, especially, that there are just far more people in corporate America, Wall Street, and CEOs who are, warming up to Trump, to put it mildly, who are, also just outright more supportive, right? And I think we really saw that candidate in many ways on the debate stage. Like, the two things that he talked about the most were tax cuts and slashing regulations. But there's also another aspect of this that I think is a noticeable change. If we go back to Trump in the Republican primaries in 2016, just to kind of set this up here, he was sort of noticeably, or compared to the field, a little bit more moderate on like Medicare and Social Security, made gestures that maybe I'll protect it. That changed right over the course of his administration, but that's kind of what he was known for at first. There was this really telling moment in the beginning of this debate where Biden made, had this gaffe, or just, kind of a senior moment. He said, we finally beat Medicare. And Trump had a really weird response, actually, which was, he said, yeah, you're ruining Medicare, and sort of insinuated because you're letting illegal immigrants onto Medicare, which is not really true. And he then went back to this about Social Security later and said the problem with Social Security is that there are all these people who are getting access to it who shouldn't, which sounds a lot like just old school welfare reform. There's all this fraud with the social safety net. And that, I think, is a rhetorical shift.
And meanwhile, if this was even true, that you would let people on Social Security who were illegal immigrants, you would improve the finances of Social Security. Right.
That's not
because they're not all 65 right now. They're all working age, and they'd be paying in right now. And if they don't have a Social Security number, they wouldn't be paying out. So it would literally be the opposite of what Trump is saying. He would improve the finances of Social Security if any of that was what he was saying was true. But his whole MO was to move everything back to the border. And he found ways to do that on every single question.
I'm going to have to sign off, but I'm sure you guys will be able to solve all of these conundrums in the remaining 15, 20 minutes. So
100%. Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you,
good.
Harold, for being here. We're going to get Hassan Kanu, who's going to be coming on and talk a little bit about Supreme Court in a minute. But we did have a question from the audience here. Question for the panel: age limits for presidential candidates. I mean, we actually do have an age requirement for presidential candidates, right? They have to be 35. So why can't they also not be 80? Can't we also do that? That would be the question. Any thoughts?
We should actually have an open competitive primary. I mean, I think that's the main solution here. I think voters should choose kind of whoever they want, but they weren't really fully allowed to this time.
Right. But I mean, in what sense would they have been fully allowed to? I mean, as Janie said, Dean Phillips was out there. He tried. Marianne Williamson was out there. She tried. The voters had no appetite. The voters had no appetite for anything else. And the question is, what creates a competitive primary?
Yeah, I mean,
that circumstance.
Well, I mean, the whole party. I mean, obviously, and I'm just saying they followed Biden. It was his decision that they were going to rally around him. I'm more saying moving forward. I just don't know that an age restriction is necessarily the best solution. I think voters should decide for whoever they want.
Understood. Looks like we have Hassan here. Hassan, are you there? Staff writer at The Prospect. There he is. How's it going? Hassan has been Thank you. Yeah, Hassan has been deep on the beat of the other tragedy that has befallen us over the last 24 hours and more, which is the Supreme Court. And we got a bunch more rulings today. Why don't we hit the lowlights here? Tell me what were the most important things that came out of the Supreme Court today?
Sure. The biggest case is probably the Chevron ruling. That's a ruling about agency deference, basically about courts deferring to agency expertise, agency ruling, and all these administrative proceedings that agencies like the SEC, Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, National Labor Relations Board, Environmental Protection Agency, so on and so on and so on and so on. They all have. And essentially what the court did was overturn decades of precedent. Chevron is at least 40 years old. That basically says that courts should back off and defer to agency expertise whenever they're making decisions that are kind of, as long as the decision is basically reasonable and is like within the scope of their statute, right? So for example, you have a statute that authorizes certain agencies to designate endangered species, for example, right? Or the National Labor Relations Board handles unions and employees when and how they can join unions and et cetera, et cetera. So for example, if you're trying to answer a question of, one example that's actually in the opinion that Sotomayor made, if you're trying to differentiate between species of like squirrels, for example, or if you're trying to decide, who qualifies as an employee and can actually join the union, et cetera, is this person who's a contractor for Uber an employee for Uber or not? Given that they don't work 40 hours, they don't have a permanent contract, et cetera, that kind of thing. So does the labor board and the wildlife agencies get to decide those questions, or does the court get to decide those questions? And basically what Chevron said for, again, 40 years plus is basically, as long as the agency is doing something that's reasonably anywhere in that realm, courts should back off and defer to the agency. And the court basically overturned that today and essentially ruled that courts will take back that power.
Yeah, they know best.
Or I shouldn't say take
squirrels.
back, will take that power, will sort of accrue it to themselves, right? So that's the biggest
courts know
ruling.
best on squirrels, of course, and courts judges usually are the most wise on who gets to be an employee, not those folks at the Department of Labor. But I think, and we've talked about this briefly, that what this really does is just sow confusion. And in this case, when you're talking about adding regulations, confusion is probably a good thing from the standpoint of the entity that's going to be regulated.
That's right. Yeah, and I mean, just to give it another concrete example that doesn't have to do with squirrels. So for example, under the statutes for Department of Health and Human Services, they have to, they reimburse hospitals and other medical facilities for treating people under Medicaid, Medicare, that kind of thing, right? The statute does this based on local prevailing wages, right? Where people are paid in the local geographic area. Well, who gets to determine what is one geographic area? Should these nurses be in this area versus zone 2 or whatever it might be? Chevron said Department of Health and Human Services is in charge of that question because they know more about how hospitals run, how they pay people, et cetera, and that kind of thing. So that's basically what the law did. And again, the court basically overturned that precedent and ceded that power back to the federal courts. Basically, there's also a big decision on homelessness that we covered at the Prospect that came out today, right? Where the court essentially overruled a Ninth Circuit decision that said it was illegal under the Eighth Amendment cruel and unusual punishment clause to do what a lot of cities have been doing, right? Sort of use the police to clear out homeless encampments or just single homeless people or unhoused families, right? And just sort of clear out the place, tell them to move along, that kind of thing. And the court kind of okayed those kind of practices.
And I think the key thing about that is that this was true whether or not those individuals had a place to go, whether or not the community had set up shelters or had available housing, they would still be within their rights to engage in this, and that I think is essentially criminalizing sleep, criminalizing the act of being homeless.
Yeah, I mean that's how the liberal justices described it, right? They made that point repeatedly that this decision effectively criminalizes homelessness, in terms of allowing the law, and that's because but before today's ruling, cities could still criminalize sleeping in places at certain times, right? So they could do so at certain times, and they could do so if someone was declining to go to a shelter, for example, right? For no good reason, right? If there's available space, shelter space in the city, and a person is saying, "Oh no, I feel like sleeping here," which that doesn't happen often. The right wing justices suggested it does actually, but if that were the case and there was space available in your town or your city, the police or the authorities could still tell someone or arrest someone or give them a citation or fine them or something. And that's why the liberal justices put it just the way you're saying it, that you guys you're effectively criminalizing what it means to be unhoused.
Well, it definitely seemed to me, and we've talked about this too, that the court has been saving these particularly pernicious cases till after this debate. that there was a political cast to the sequencing of this stuff. Obviously, we still haven't gotten the Trump immunity ruling. They're literally waiting till the last day of the session, which I believe is going to be on Monday. And they didn't want, I mean, you wrote about the big ruling from the day of the debate that could have been part of the debate. It wasn't, but it could have been, which was the EMTALA and abortion ruling out of, involving Idaho. What happened there? And you actually see political machinations in that, as you wrote for The Prospect.
I think so. Yeah. I mean, we had another abortions in emergency situations, essentially ruling or non-ruling, right? That which actually leaked a day early, right? And then came out on the day apparently that the court had always intended that it would come out, which was yesterday on the day of the debate. It did sort of tangentially come up in the debate, right? I mean, who knows how the candidates were prepared or what Trump had on his mind, but he did bring up and say that I'm happy that the court allowed mifepristone. I agree with that. That's the few weeks ago abortion decision. But the one that came on the day of the debate, he mentioned tangentially that he said, I agree that it should be allowed in cases of to prevent a woman's death, rape, or incest, right? The death, that first prong, is basically what's at issue in places like Idaho, right? Like, in other words, how close to death does a woman have to be if the treatment she requires is abortion, for a doctor to be able to do that legally, because Idaho's law basically says you cannot do that. Give a woman that kind of care or procedure if it's to save her life, or maybe to because it's already certainty that the child will not be able to be delivered alive, and so that procedure is necessary to protect the woman. Idaho's law bars doing that in many instances. So yes, I mean, Trump did tangentially bring it up when he said, I agree with exceptions in these circumstances. In a roundabout way, he was kind of referring to that. And now, you have the day after the debate. So again, Trump was able to have to sort of, he's able to sort of calm the fears that lots of people have around the country, especially in states that don't have these draconian laws yet, right? That the status quo is bad enough, but lots of folks are worried that it might get even worse or things might come to their state. And Trump was able to basically calm that in a sense, right? He was able to say, no, that's not going to happen. Where things are right now is where they're going to stay, kind of thing. Wouldn't have been able to say that if it wasn't for the court's decision being coming down that day and the one from a couple of weeks ago. And then today, the day after debate, now you have more decisions being dripped down that are horrible, that really couldn't be defended by
Right.
a Republican candidate on any stage, right? The Chevron decision, and a couple of days on Monday, we'll get the presidential immunity decision. And I didn't mention the a decision on the January 6th prosecutions today as well. The Chevron decision,
Right.
the January 6th prosecution decision, former President Donald Trump would have had a hard time defending those decisions on stage because
Right.
he has, he supports policies and talks in favor of things that are directly in line with those rulings. So yeah.
And just briefly, the January 6th decision was throughout basically a tool that prosecutors were using about obstruction of an official proceeding to indict hundreds of January 6th protesters. So, we'll see what happens with those actual cases and whether those people will be set free or what. So we have like a few minutes left. I want to go around the room here and get final thoughts. Maybe the good framing here is, where do we go from here? What do you think is going to happen, or what would you like to see happen in the aftermath of obviously what we saw on display last night, or I guess in Hassan's case, you could talk about what's a wrap up for the court. But let's start with Janie.
I'd be interested to see if, how Biden chooses to respond to sort of the idea that he like failed or lost the debate. Because again, I think a lot of the sort of stuttering that he had in his words played a part in that. Even though it might be subtle, but I think it again kind of fed into the idea that he's like too old to actually be president. So I'm wondering like how he's going to respond to that, and if there are any steps that he's going to take to try and like combat that. He may end up just repeating the whole repeating his record and stuff in order to prove his competence. But I wonder if there's a different strategy in the pipeline to counteract that.
I mean, the possible saving grace is that Americans have the attention spans of goldfish. Luke.
Yeah, I mean, I've kind of thrown out my thoughts about the debate. I mean, I think we'll just be following for the next couple of weeks on what, sort of party leaders say and indicate, and we can sort of read the tea leaves from there. But I'm going to kick this off a little bit, actually, that Hassan, because what I'm following right now also that we sort of mentioned is the Jarksi decision this week regarding the Securities and Exchange Commission. And basically, though, perhaps across the administrative state, the use of administrative law judges for certain cases, which just kind of can speed up the process. Hassan, how much do we know about if that decision is going to apply to other agencies, departments, like maybe the Federal Trade Commission or others? I've just heard some mixed opinions about whether this is sort of narrowly about the SEC or if it's going to be more broad.
I don't think there's any. I mean, I think you can make the point that the decision is a narrower. The decision is narrower in the sense that the challengers had sort of three different grounds on which they challenge, like use of administrative law judges, and the Supreme Court only sort of agreed with one. It's narrower in that sense. It's not narrower in the sense that it can still apply to other agencies. I wouldn't say that. So yeah, I think it. I think definitely certain parties will try to apply it in other cases involving other agencies. And I think there's little doubt that some courts will agree with that, right? Even if that question gets back up to the Supreme Court, I think enough of the justices will agree that, that this can be analogized super closely to at least some other agencies, if not all of them that use administrative law judges.
Great. And Hassan, I guess I'll get a minute from you if you want to talk about the court or the debate, or what you want to
Oh, sure,
close
I
with
did. I
here?
did actually. No, I wanted to, as if I don't have enough to pay attention to, I was clicking in on you guys' conversation again, now and again earlier. And I did want to agree strongly with Janie's point that I do think, I mean, I'll be honest, when I was watching it, I also had a sort of queasy feeling, right? At the start when he had to stumble out the gate, and then different times when it sort of seemed like things were happening that could be perceived as an age problem, or like you said, Jane, like it could be also related to the fact that he's someone who got over a stuttering problem, and also just isn't a great, a wonderful public speaker by judged by other politicians. But I think the reason I got that queasy feeling was because I sort of expected how the press would react to that, and I think it's an overreaction. I don't think
Mhm.
much of the voting public is gonna be that alarmed by the clips that they're probably going to see, and I think it's crazy to suggest that in July we should be thinking about a different candidate. And here I'll agree with you, David, partially that the only viable choice, if we were to go that route, would be the vice president. I think anything else sounds just absolutely insane.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the first 10 minutes were pretty bad, and he actually did get better after that. But
He
the
gave a lot.
media
He gave a
narrative,
he gave a lot of coherent answers, and he gave he. I mean, someone like stumbling at the start and then giving very coherent
meaning,
answers later on, that would
yeah,
seem to negate that. Like, oh, he's not. It just. I mean,
right.
he
The
definitely came
stamina
across as
question,
an
yeah,
elderly man, and but that's just true.
right.
He is an elderly man,
The the
but he is
media the
coherent.
media narrative was set in place in those first 10 minutes. It was all over by then. Well, look, we're out of time. Obviously, we're going to keep having these conversations. I want to thank Janie, first time on the roundup. Thank you, great job. Luke, Hassan, Harold Meyerson, who's I believe on the train right now. We'll be back next week. Same bat time, same bat channel. Thanks, and have a great weekend.